Welcome to the Escape into Board Games podcast.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Matt.
And this is our escape from the real world where we talk about board games. In this episode, we talk about some modern classics.
So please join us for the Escape into Board Games podcast. From the 1980s until the mid-1990s, board game publishers would release between 500 and 1,000 different board games each year. But then in the late 90s, something happened.
Board games started to catch on, and publishers started to release more games. By 2004, there were over 2,000 board games published each year. In 2013, we hit 3,000, and in 2017, 4,000.
There's no question that board games are continuing to get better. It's not enough anymore that games have solid mechanisms. You need decent components and beautiful artwork. The bar has been steadily raised over the last 30 years.
However, we can't ignore those older games, the timeless hits that broke ground for our hobby to be what it is today.
We call these the modern classics.
When we talk about modern classics, it's a very subjective idea, right?
Yeah.
What is a modern classic to me might not be a modern classic to someone else.
And I don't think that the eras of board games have been clearly defined. We're not saying board games between 1985 and 1995.
Exactly. I don't want to put a year on it, that's for sure. 100 years hasn't passed kind of thing for the games that we're going to be talking about. So that might change our opinions over time.
Some of the games are 30 years old, 20 years old, and we're still playing them today. People are still playing them. You and I, they're still very popular.
Mm-hmm. I tried to think of this as games that were groundbreaking or original in a way that stood out.
Yeah.
Some of these games aren't completely unique in that it was the first game to do what it does, but just that it did it in a groundbreaking way. It did it in a way that, was outstanding and really influenced a lot of games that came after it.
Exactly.
I'd say that a lot of these games are games that you should probably try at least once. And, arguably some of them can be on that list of games you must have.
Every gamer should have in their collection.
Some of them, for sure. I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Catan. The Settlers of Catan, or just Catan, is a dice-rolling, network-building, economic trading game for 3 to 4 players, ages 10 and up. Catan was designed by Klaus Teuber and originally published in 1995 by Cosmos. In the Settlers of Catan, players are settlers on the island of Catan, competing to build cities, roads, and settlements until one player has earned 10 victory points. The setup consists of the iconic hexes of fields, forests, pastures, mountains, and hills. Each hex is randomly assigned a number between 2 and 12. There are no 7s. On a player's turn, they roll dice. The hexes on the board that match the rolled number will produce resources. Forests will give wood to neighboring settlements, and fields will give wheat. All players collect resources this way, on everybody's turn. And then on your turn, you can trade your excess resources with other players, and then convert those resources to roads, cities, and settlements, or a development card. When you have more settlements out, you're going to collect more resources from the hexes on the board. And when you spend the resources to upgrade your settlements to a city, you will get double the resources for every time you collect.
What I remember about playing Catan for the first time was that the game has very little downtime in between turns.
Mm-hmm.
In Monopoly, you roll the dice, you do your turn, and then you wait until it's your turn. And there's pretty much nothing you do unless the person lands on your property and they get money.
Yeah.
In Catan, though, the dice are rolled and you get, you don't always get resources, but you always have the opportunity to possibly get resources.
Yeah.
And that was a really new and exciting way to keep players engaged throughout the whole game. For me, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then if you know somebody's getting, they got a ton of wool on that last roll and I need wool, maybe now I'm going to make that offer to trade with them, because you can only trade with the active player. Yeah, it's a really interesting way where they keep the players engaged that way.
Yeah.
It's a big departure from what was available at the time.
I guess there was games with trading. I can't really remember, a game from my childhood that had trading, but that felt new.
Monopoly has trading, and I always considered this as the antithesis to Monopoly for some reason.
Right.
It was the biggest game. It's arguably the biggest game on the market, and Catan being the biggest game of the hobby market.
Right.
In both games, you're building up your town, acquiring property, and the person with the most property is the one that's going to win. But in Catan, we're all building, but not taking away, right? I'm building up, I'm building roads, and I'm building my settlements, and you're building your roads, and you're building your settlements, and my roads can cut your roads off and prevent maybe you from developing in this area, but I'm not taking your stuff away.
Right. Like
in Monopoly, you land on Park Place, and you get decimated, you have to sell all your stuff, and that feels bad.
Yeah.
People know this now in board game design, that feels bad. People don't like that feeling.
Right.
They don't have that in Catan at all.
And I feel like the closest to that is the robber, and the robber really affects that's a leader or catch-up mechanism, right? The person who's kind of got the most resources is the only one that's punished in that case.
That is a fair point. There is a bit of that.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of development cards that can be punishing that way.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
The development cards are interesting, and some of them will allow you to build roads better, or they'll give you a victory point. Like you can draw the market or the governor's house or the library, and you can play that at any point and say, hey, victory point, which is great for ending the game in a surprising and exciting way. Or you can play the Monopoly card.
Yeah.
Put down the Monopoly card and you say to everybody at the table, give me all your wheat or give me all your wool. And they just have to fork it all over.
Yeah. I always felt that card in particular was a nod to Monopoly, the board game. Like it was kind of like, here's this new upstart board game that's coming for you, Monopoly.
Right.
And, Klaus Tabor had to put that in to say, well, here's a Monopoly card, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
It's going to make you feel like crap, just like that game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So in Catan, if you roll a 7, which is the most common number rolled with 2 dice, you get to move the robber. The robber will block a hex from producing resources if that number is ever rolled. So if players are picking on you, you can play a soldier card from the development deck, which will allow you to pick up the robber and move it. And so what's interesting is that we do have that, right? When somebody's rolling a 7, they're going to pick on you. They're going to take that robber and block your economy engine, and so you don't have anything to build with. You have to mitigate that, and a good way to mitigate that is with the soldier cards.
Right.
And if you have the most number of soldiers, you get a victory point for having the largest army.
Yes, that's right.
So that's another path to victory.
That's right.
Catan has what's called input randomness, and that's one of the key markers of a Euro game. We're going to be talking about a lot of Euro games in this episode. This input randomness is different from output randomness. So Catan would be at the beginning of your turn, you roll the dice, and then that randomly gives you some resources.
Right.
Now you have those, you make the decision what you're going to do with those resources. In Dungeons and Dragons, you go, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. I want to go over there. I'm going to jump. I'm going to attack the guy and swing him with my sword. I get the +1 for the sword. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then you roll the dice to find out if you succeed.
Right. So the idea is you still have this agency, this ability to make a decision. You're not completely beholden to a random element in the game, but there is a random element that affects how well you do it.
Exactly.
Catan feels very fresh and new when I think about playing it for the first time or the first couple times. Like everything about it, it's like, oh, I've never seen a game with hexes. I've never seen a game with a board that can change its orientation and replayability like this.
Yeah.
And it's got trading, although there has been games with trading. And I feel the same too of like sort of turning resources into victory points. That felt new.
Yeah.
But I don't know that any of these things were all, that completely new. Maybe the hexes.
It's always somebody's first introduction to that stuff, though.
Yeah.
It was my first introduction to turning this into that.
Yeah.
Oh, I need a wood, a stone, a brick in order to make a road. Oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
And that, I just love that puzzle. And we've seen that 1,000 times since, and I'm not going to tire from it. But this is my introduction.
I've talked to so many people who say Catan was their gateway game, the first ever modern board game that they played. It wasn't for me. I was actually very late to the Catan stage. How about yourself?
It wasn't the first hobby board game I played, but it was in the top 10.
One of them?
It was almost like a rite of passage. Like, why isn't it in your collection?
Yeah.
There's a couple of other games we're going to talk about in this episode as well that fall into that category.
Yeah.
Like, it just seemed like you had to have them before you could even call yourself a board gamer.
Carcassonne. Published in 2000, Carcassonne is a tile-laying game about building a medieval city in France for 2 to 5 players ages 7 and up. Designed by Klaus Jugenrede, Carcassonne can be played in 45 to 60 minutes, depending on how many players are playing and how many expansions you are using. Carcassonne is published by Hans im Glück. In Carcassonne, there is no board. Players are taking turns adding a tile to the middle of the table, which will slowly become the landscape of the game and the board where pieces are played. Each tile has different areas on them and might feature a field, a road, a part of a city, or a cloister. And tiles must be placed on the table adjacent to another tile in such a way that city pieces are connected to other city pieces, roads connected to roads, etc. After placing your tile, you have the option to place one of your meeples on one of those areas of that tile. If it's placed in a city, the meeple becomes a knight. If it's placed on a road, it's a robber, and on a cloister, it's a monk. Finally, if you place your meeple on the grassland field, it becomes a farmer. Each different section only scores points for the meeple's owner when that section is completed. It's possible that you might place your meeple down on a tile, and that road or city may never get completed at all, so you won't score many or any points for that. Some points are awarded during the game when a tile is placed that completes a city, a road, or completely encircles a cloister, and some points are awarded at the end of the game as well. The winner is the player who has the most points at the end of the game. Carcassonne is truly a modern classic and one that continues to hit the table for me and for my wife.
Yeah, it gets just a lot of plays here too. I think it's the perfect 2-player game.
Yeah, it really is. It comes up like when people ask me, give me recommendations for 2-player games. It's up there for me still because I think it is an excellent 2-player game. Mm-hmm. And the expansions that you can add, which we'll talk about, add a lot of replayability. And I think it hits just that right amount of conflict and strategy that, works really well in a 2-player game.
There's a little bit of player interaction, but it's not too mean.
Yeah.
But I mean, it can be mean if you really, block somebody out or something, but it's not super mean.
Yeah.
More chill. It's more of a kind of a chill game.
I find that if you're playing in a mean way or you're playing with somebody that's mean, it sucks, to have your city of, 70 points taken away from you right at the end. But there's still lots to do and there's still lots of ways to get points. And the game is usually pretty close that it doesn't feel devastating the way, some other games or take that games might.
Yeah.
Now, going back to it being a 2-player game, I find that it can be a little draggy. Like it can take a little bit long at higher player counts. Mm-hmm. If you're playing with 4 or 5 people, it can be a little thinky in terms of finding the optimal spot.
Yeah. I've never played Carcassonne at 5 players.
No, we've played it a lot, actually.
Wow.
I actually have a lot of really fond memories playing Carcassonne with my family. We played this a lot when we first started playing it. I played it with my sister and my brother-in-law, and we spent nights and nights and nights playing Carcassonne.
Nice.
Sometimes 2, maybe even 3 times in a row.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We really liked it. And we would, let's see what this expansion adds when it's combined with this expansion. And let's try this and that. And a lot of tinkering with, the way the different expansions interact with each other.
Very cool.
What was really cool, though, you said it's like a relaxing kind of chill kind of game.
Yeah, it's sort of chill.
So when my niece was born, my sister had her baby, Carcassonne kind of became the go-to game. We sort of put a lot of most other games on hold while they were, tired and dealing with a small child. Carcassonne just seemed to hit the right level of thinkiness without being too much. And we could play a couple games in a night. And actually what we did was we would play with Charlotte, my niece, like on my lap.
Oh, no way.
And in between turns, I'd be playing with her and cuddling with her. She'd fall asleep on my lap.
That's awesome.
Or we would pass her around too. It's like, okay, it's my turn to hold the baby. And okay, and then Charlie, she would make the rounds like it was like a first player marker almost, or a last player marker. It's like, okay, it's my turn to hold the baby. That's where most of my fond memories come from playing Carcassonne. I mean, I love the game. It's very fun, but it's just such a warm memory of holding my niece and having her fall asleep in my arms.
That's awesome.
Wake up crying and want to touch the board.
Very cool. Yeah.
I used to call her the baby Godzilla because she wanted to crawl across the table and knock all the meeples everywhere.
That's like having a fond memory associated with a really good album.
Yeah. Whenever I play Carcassonne, I think of my niece, and she was just, months old. So that was a fun memory. That's one we played a lot while she was a baby. Carcassonne is also one that I've played a lot on my phone.
Me too.
Yeah, you too?
Yeah. I got one of the first implementations of it before that went to the more recent release.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah, there's been a couple different versions of the app, and I like them both. I think the current one is beautiful, and it does a really good job of sort of how it works. My only complaint is it needs a lot more of the expansions that are available. Like, we're ready to pay more. Why can't we get more expansions? I'll pay for them all. I don't care. I've already bought the hard copy. But it's a very good app. This is 2 thumbs up for the Carcassonne app for sure. One of the things I love is when the game is over, just looking at, the cities and the landscape and watching that landscape grow and take shape is a lot of fun throughout the game.
Yeah.
It's not what I would call, it's not a beautiful game. Like even the new version with the new art.
Yeah.
It's a slightly better looking version, perhaps. The greens are a little brighter, that kind of thing. But there's something about the end result of filling your table with all these tiles and, they all interconnect and you can see all the different roads. Mm-hmm. There's something about it that is beautiful.
Oh, for sure.
Once it's all done.
It's one of those games, I mean, you built it, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these games we're talking about in this episode are going to have that.
Right.
We've all built something, we put it down, and we did that. That's what we built in this game.
Right.
And there's a certain sort of pride in that accomplishment and what it took to put that together, whether it's the map of Carcassonne or the longest road you got in Catan.
Yeah, for sure. Carcassonne is a great game to teach to new people who are new to the hobby. I highly recommend it. The rules for the base game are very simple. And like I said, there are a ton of expansions for Carcassonne. I think that with Dominion and Carcassonne, those 2 games have to have the market cornered on the number of expansions available.
Yeah.
So much so that I think it keeps the game very fresh, years and years later and multiple plays later. And everyone I talk to about Carcassonne has their favorite expansion and ones that they say, we don't ever play without this expansion or that expansion ever again.
Yeah.
My personal favorite, there's a few. It's the Builder, the Robber, the Abbey, the Inns and Cathedrals, and as the oddball one in, I like to throw in the Flying Machines.
Oh, wow.
Those are my favorites. I like ones that, there's some classics in there, but I like the Flying Machines because it lets you mess around with people. Do you have a favorite?
I think I've played the River expansion once.
Wow.
And that's it. That is it.
Wow.
I mean, there is enough game going on there. You don't need the expansions to enjoy Carcassonne.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a very good point, Matt. This is a great game on its own. The only thing I would amend to that is when you've played as much as we have, and I think I'm at somewhere around 60 registered plays, and that's only since I've been counting my plays. You do want the expansions after that, because like I said, we probably played it 100 times. Well, my niece was, less than a year old, and those plays didn't all get added in. The Builder is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
That kind of lets you take a second turn. If you add to a feature, a city or a road that the robber is attached to, then you get to place a second tile.
Oh.
And that's a great way to sort of chain 2 points together.
Very cool.
And it also puts a really big target on that feature. So if I have a city with a robber in it, people are like, okay, let's try and take that over so that he's not using that as much, that kind of thing.
Cool.
The Carcassonne expansions provide a lot more new tiles, new meeples that provide new ways to play, rules to provide more player interaction. Some will add a die, new features and structures like bridges and castles. You'd mentioned the river. The river is a new way to start the game. There's even actual maps that provide an actual board now, and you place tiles on top of them into this grid. One that we've played occasionally is one that I call Carcassonne. This is where we took several of the official expansions, the ones that provide the most conflict and ability to mess with your opponents, and put them all in one game. So expansions like the dragon, yep, there's a dragon, the count, the mage, the witch, and a bunch of others, including the flying machine, which lets you kind of fly in and take over somebody's territory. I know a lot of Carcassonne hardcore fans don't like some of those expansions because they are quite mean and they really do let you mess with other people's strategy. But when you put them all into one very mean, cruel game, it can be fun too.
That's awesome. Stone Age. Stone Age is a prehistoric dice-rolling set collection worker placement game for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, that plays in about 90 minutes. Designed by Bernd Bernhofer and published by Hans and Gluck in 2008. In Stone Age, players play as a prehistoric village, hunting and gathering and building up resources, trying to acquire the most culture to win the game. Stone Age is a worker placement game. Not the first worker placement game, but one of the first. Players start the game with 5 workers, which they can place on various worker placement spots around the board. Each spot on the board represents a different action, and when players place their worker on that spot, they get to take that action. But it also blocks other players from taking that action. Stone Age has 5 resources: food, wood, clay, stone, and gold. To collect these, players place any number of workers in the resource collection area. The more workers you place, the better chances of collecting more resources. When gathering the resources, you roll 1 die for every worker you have in that spot. Then you count up the pips, or the small dots, on the die, and divide depending on what resource you're harvesting at the time. Food produces 1 food for every 2 pips. Wood is 1 wood for every 3 pips. Clay is 1 clay for every 4 pips. Stone takes 5 pips, and it takes 6 pips to make 1 gold.
This is another game where you're sort of, oh no, is it? I don't know, actually.
It's not. See, that's the thing. In this game, we are using output randomness to collect resources, which is really kind of odd for a Euro, but here we are. Players can spend a worker to build a tool, and tools will allow you to increase the value of a die.
Right.
So you can help mitigate those dice rolls.
Yeah.
And you can decide to use that tool after you roll, which is kind of interesting. So if you haven't succeeded, then you can go, oh, okay, I'm going to spend these 2 tools to just bump this up so I can get an extra food, get an extra wood.
Yeah.
So what are we doing with all these resources? Well, mostly you're building huts. Along the bottom of the board, there are several stacks of hut tiles that are revealed at a certain number at a time, depending on player count. In order to collect these huts, you need to build them by placing a worker on them and then spending the required resources.
Right.
Their victory points or culture points are printed in the top left-hand corner. So a hut that requires a few wood and 1 clay will be less victory points than a house that requires lots of stone and gold to build.
Yeah. There's also the civilization cards, the cards that you're collecting. That's another way you can get points.
That's right. There's this other sort of set collection thing going with these civilization cards. They come in a couple of different flavors. These work like a set collection component, but the cards also give you a one-time bonus, which will help you gather resources or build buildings.
Stone Age is a game that you introduced me to quite recently, actually. It's one that I somehow missed. I really, really, really am so thankful that you did, because I love this game. It's a lot of fun.
Nice. That's awesome.
We play it a lot, and we play it on Board Game Arena. We play the tabletop version. And, it's still, I still wouldn't call it my favorite worker placement game.
No, certainly not. Yeah.
Worker placement is probably one of the top 2 or maybe 3 mechanisms that I like and enjoy the most.
Yeah.
So it's in a big group of games that I really, really like. But it's up there. I do enjoy it. And I think for its age, it holds up incredibly well. Mm-hmm. I think it's an excellent way to introduce someone to the concept of a worker placement game and that sort of gathering resources and, what you need to do to turn them into points and that kind of thing. Yeah, I love the game. Love it. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a 2002 role selection game for 3 to 5 players. It plays in about 2 hours and is suggested for ages 12 and up. Puerto Rico was designed by Andreas Seyfarth and was published by Alia Ravensburger. Puerto Rico is about colonizing the island of Puerto Rico by farming, shipping goods, and constructing buildings during the 1500s. Puerto Rico was the first game to use role selection and a follow mechanism. How this works is each turn the first player will draft a specific role card in the game, choosing from settler, mayor, builder, craftsman, trader, captain, or prospector. This role is connected to an action in the game, letting you do something that you want to do during the game. The first player gets the benefit of taking this action first, which in Puerto Rico can be extremely important, and an added bonus for choosing it. Then, in turn order, all other players get to perform the same action. So, for example, the mayor provides new colonists to work in the fields and in your buildings, and the craftsman allows all players to create goods, while the captain lets all players take turns loading their goods into the spaces available on the waiting ships. When a role is selected, no one else can take it again until the next round. Players earn victory points for owning buildings, for shipping goods, and for having a colonist working in large buildings at the end of the game. There was a time when Puerto Rico was ranked number 1 on BoardGameGeek.com, and the game was a very big deal. It was seemed like it was number 1 forever.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think it was ever going to stop. It's easy to see why, too, because when you look at some of the games that came out after Puerto Rico that also used the role selection follow mechanism, you can see how influential it was. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Games like Twilight Imperium, Glory to Rome, Race for the Galaxy, Rising Sun, Tiny Epic Galaxies, Tiny Towns, Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition, and many, many more. The genius of Puerto Rico comes from the role selection follow mechanism and the need to time things just right. You want to make sure you have enough money to build the buildings you want whenever someone chooses the builder, enough open spots for the colonists you receive whenever someone chooses the mayor, and time the shipping of your goods just right so they fit all the available spots on the ship to take them back to Spain. Otherwise, those goods will rot and you will lose them.
I always felt that part to be such a cruel part of that game.
Yes.
Where if you weren't paying attention, you could just easily go to do that action and then, oh, no, there's no spots for my...
Yeah.
And then you're stuck, right?
It can be quite a mean game. That's one of the reasons why I feel like the age might be just a tad low for what I would recommend. Although I have played it with kids that are younger and they did fine. Mm-hmm. Because everyone's doing the same action at the same time, the game has lots of instances where a player or multiple players will be left out of the chosen action. I mean, for example, the trader action lets players sell one good to the trader house, but there's a limited number of spots that are available for the goods and the trader house can only have one of each type of good. If it's my turn to select a roll, and I can see that we all have coffee to sell, and I'm the only one who has tobacco to sell, then I want to sell my coffee first, taking up the only spot available for coffee in the trading house. When it comes back to me, I can then sell the tobacco, and I will be the only one who made any money at the trading house that round.
I don't play this game very often.
No?
It's too mean for me.
It's very mean. It's a mean game. And that's another reason why I think you have to be careful with the age group. Some kids can get upset with it, right? It's a table flipper for sure, right? I've never actually seen anyone do it, but this might be the game to do it. In the farms, your crops are corn, coffee, sugar, tobacco, and indigo, and each farm requires a colonist to work there and grow the crops. All of them but corn also require a matching building with a colonist working there as well to process the goods that you produce for each crop. I always thought of this as making it available to be shipped out, putting them into barrels and whatever they did to get them on the ships to go back to Spain. There's a limited number of each available building to buy. There's also a limited number of goods that can fit on the ships, taking them back to Spain. All of this adds up to Puerto Rico being quite a mean game. Timing your production, choosing your role, and successfully predicting what other players will want to do on their turn are essential to success in Puerto Rico.
We should talk about the theme of Puerto Rico.
Absolutely. It's a theme that is quite problematic, and I completely understand why. It wasn't published that long ago, but I do think of it as coming out in sort of a different time in the evolution of modern board gaming.
Yeah, there was a lot of games about
colonizing.
Yeah.
The idea of creating a game and playing a game about colonizing, the island of Puerto Rico and using slaves, which are in the game are just called colonists, to grow your crops. That kind of thing was really overlooked in the game.
It's not that different than the settlers of Catan. Catan is a fictitious island. We're using the resources of the island in order to build roads. It's a similar thing going on here, except Puerto Rico is a real place.
Yeah, with real historic evils that happen.
Yeah.
And at the time, people would brush it off just the way they would a movie with a lot of violence and say it was just a game. Like, let's just play the game.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I probably said something similar to that the first time someone brought up the theme of Puerto Rico to myself. But I think as the hobby continues to grow and evolve, and as we as a species start to learn things, historical games can become problematic.
Absolutely.
And the issues are important to at least address and hopefully talk a bit about before, during, and after playing a game that's based on historical events.
We really should talk about Agricola, but I haven't played Agricola. And Chris, you're not a big fan of Agricola, so...
No, not at all. Not at all. We've played it a couple times. I've played it 4 or 5 times. Sherry's played it twice, and it's Sherry's most hated game. And it's up there on mine of most disliked games.
So instead, we're going to talk about Caverna, the Cave Farmers. Caverna the Cave Farmers is a dwarven mining, tile placement, resource management, worker placement game for 1 to 7 players that plays in about 30 minutes per player. Designed by Uwe Rosenberg and released in 2013, Caverna is published by Mayfair Games. In Caverna, players are dwarves, carving out a home in a cave and farming the land. Caverna is another worker placement game. Players start out with only 2 workers, a dwarf and their spouse. Each personal player board is divided into land for farming and a cave you explore and dig deeper into throughout the game. Do you want another worker? Well, first you're going to need to carve out a space for a room in your cave, and then you're going to have to furnish it. Only after you've built, say, the simple dwelling, will there be room for another dwarf. Caverna plays like a sandbox game, in that there are so many choices and paths one can take. The number of worker placement spots depends on the number of players. There are some really interesting spaces in the higher player counts, but people often agree that the game is too slow at 6 and 7 players. It can accommodate 7,
Wow.
but you might not want to play it at 7. It would appear that the sweet spot is around 4. But the variety isn't just in the spots your workers can go, but the rooms you can build in your cave as well. Carpenter, stone carver, blacksmith, wood supplier, stone supplier, quarry, weaving parlor, milking parlor, beer parlor. It goes on and on.
Very good.
48 in total.
Wow.
So you're building up your dwarven clan, farming the land for wood, grain, and vegetables, breeding animals like sheep, cattle, and donkeys, hunting wild boar. From the cave, you can produce stone, ore, and ruby gems.
Cool.
Each of these components is a wooden piece in the game. The vegetables, the meeples, the animals, they're all like wooden pieces. The gems are like little crystals.
Nice.
The box weighs a ton. This is a massive game. You can forge weapons and send your dwarves on expeditions. The better class of weapon they have, the more rewards they come home with. Because there are so many things to do and so many choices to make, it feels less like a game and more like a simulator.
That's a good explanation. I like that.
You have to feed your people each year, just like Agricola. I know that's a chief complaint among Agricola haters.
Absolutely.
Now, there's a lot of rules how the animals work and how the caves work and everything. I wouldn't call it elegant or streamlined, but once you know the rules, it's easy to keep track of them. They seem to be intuitive and they make sense in comparison to the theme. They click.
Okay.
The components are gorgeous. They're all wood, but the dwarves are simple discs and the art is quite forgettable.
Okay. Caverna is a game that I haven't played. I think that it sounds very much like I won't enjoy it because it's very similar in a lot of ways to Agricola.
Yeah.
And
what is it you didn't like about Agricola?
it felt like a lot of stress.
Yeah.
It wasn't super fun in terms of I'm going to do this and this is going to make that happen and then this is going to happen. Then I'm going to get lots of points.
Yeah.
And the example Sherry always used is, I think we played for 3.5 hours and she got 4 points. And she did very badly in her first play. And she's like, that's a point an hour. and that, isn't most people's example with Agricola. I would say, though, that that's a pretty good criticism of what I don't like about Agricola. It's just... I feel like the pieces are clever, but not put together in a way that make it super fun to play.
It's survival farming, right? You're basically trying to sustain your life on a plot of land.
Yeah.
And it does evoke that hardship.
Yeah, it's calling it a simulation sounds really correct.
Caverna is set in a fantasy world. And so even though you definitely, want to make sure you have food for the winter, it's a little less stressful.
Okay.
In that all these different paths you can take in order to generate resources is kind of interesting and fun to explore. And you kind of you're navigating the different possibilities every game. And it's really sort of an open-ended, it's nothing like any other game I've played where you have all these unlimited choice ahead of you. And you're like, what should I do? In a worker placement game, traditionally, the other players are blocking the places that you want to go that would force you then to take another path. Oh, I can't do the collection thing at this moment. I'm going to do that instead because it's blocked. It's not like that in this game. There's just so many things to do. You don't necessarily need to do this on that turn. You can do that on the next turn. And Caverna has these spots that start off weak, but then get better over time, like the logging location or ore mining. They each start off with a few wood or ore, but then if players aren't taking those spots, then each round we add more and more resources to them until they get to the point where they can't be ignored.
Cool.
So in that way, the value of the worker placement spots are changing throughout the game. And it's hard to predict where they're going to be at any given round. And then the game feels more tactical than strategic.
Right.
The sandbox simulator is a really great way to describe that one.
because of Agricola, every game that we've played since where it requires you have to feed your family or feed your workers at the end of the round, I get a groan from the other side of the table. Oh no, like Agricola. No, it's not like Agricola. This is Stone Age where you got to feed your workers every round. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
We're going to get back to the show after a brief message. This next ad is for Chris's own company, Geeky Goodies. If you'd like to hear what an ad for your game, product, or website might sound like, drop us a line at escapeintoboardgames@gmail.com. When we escape into board games, we're always wearing our Geeky Goodies t-shirts.
They are great conversation starters for gamers and non-gamers.
But did you know that they also sell masks, socks, hoodies, game room posters, mugs, and so much more?
All things board games.
All things geeky.
Visit geekygoodies.com and use coupon code ESCAPE for a 10% discount off your purchase. Power Grid. Power Grid is a network-building economic game about building and powering power stations to the most cities. Published in 2004, Power Grid is designed for 2 to 6 players ages 12 and up and plays in 2 or more hours. Designed by Friedman Fries and published by 2F Spiel. The goal in Power Grid is to supply the most cities with power when the end game is triggered. The player in the lead starts off each round by bidding on one of the available power plants. Each plant has a number of different resources, either coal, oil, garbage, or uranium, that it requires to work, and a number of how many cities that it can power. As the game goes on, more and more efficient power plants become available, but you'll have to start with some low-level plants that require a lot of resources to power just one or maybe a few cities to get started. The market in this area allows players to see some of the power plants that will become available in the near future. Players can only purchase one power plant per round and can never have more than 3 at any time. So you always want the best plants.
I think this is a terrific way to start a game. This auction where the money is so tight in the game and you can't do anything without these power plants. Here are the 4 best we have to offer. And the first player just picks one.
Yeah.
And starts the bidding, and they're numbered, right? Like the low power plants are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that's the starting bid. We're going to start with the 3. I'm going to bid 3, and then it goes around the table, and you can look and you can tell maybe who's into garbage, who's into coal.
Right.
And then, he's going to want that one. I don't want that, but he's going to want that one. Maybe if I just push the price up a buck.
Yeah.
In this game, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, it really does.
If $1 didn't make a difference, then the auction mechanism wouldn't work as well as it does.
Yeah.
But because a single dollar will make a difference, you can go, okay, I want you to spend $4 for that $3 power plant. And that's going to potentially put a wrench into your works.
It's another example of where you can manipulate the market in this game and mess with other players and their strategies.
Yeah.
It can be dangerous because if you decide to bid that $1 extra on a power plant that you're not really that interested in, and the other person says, you're stuck with it. You're done.
Yeah.
But it's good. It works really, really well.
I like games that set up a system and that allow the players to bring their personalities to it. Settlers of Catan has that trading mechanism where some players will be a big bully about, oh no, I've got all the wood and no one's ever getting wood.
Right.
If you want wood, you got to build next to the forest. You're never getting it from me. Right. So it depends on who you're playing with. And for Power Grid, the player interaction is there. It's not punishing, but it is there.
Yeah.
And depending on who you're playing with could really change the feel of the game.
That's true. That's very true. After that, in reverse order, players move to a market phase and buy resources needed to provide energy to their power plants. Players can optionally purchase up to twice as many resources as they need for the round, and this allows them to slightly drive up the demand and the prices for other players at the table.
I love this.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is so great because the resources at the end, the first resources you buy are cheap, $2, $3, $4. And as you pick them up off the board, the ones that remain are now stuck on the higher prices places. If your power plant needs 2 coal, but you buy 4 coal, well, now the next person that buys coal is buying it at $5 instead of $3.
Yeah. And the way the market works is actually the more efficient resources are very expensive and very few. But as the game goes on, at certain points, you're adding in more resources of each type. So the price of uranium drops quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the price of coal and oil goes up because, so many players are using it through the course of the game.
If you're not upgrading your power plants, then you're going to end up paying more for resources at the end.
Yeah. And this reverse order thing is kind of a catch-up mechanism where the person who's in lead starts the round and they get to buy the best power plant. But now the person who's in last place starts this part of the round and they can drive up the prices of resources.
Yeah.
Because I'm first, I might get the best power plant, but I'll have to pay more theoretically anyway, for my resources because every other player has gone before me and bought resources. I think that's actually a really brilliant catch-up mechanism.
It is so simple and so elegant. It works really, really well.
It's elegant, yeah. And it can be quite punishing to be in first. Like, it's not one of those games where, it's advantageous to be first. And in fact, again, the next phase is starting with the last player again. Players can build their network of cities on the map, paying a base price for each city, and then the cost of the connections between the cities. And those costs can vary quite a bit.
Yeah.
So if you're in last place this round, you didn't get maybe the power plant that you wanted, but you got a wealth of resources that you bought quite cheap. And now you get to buy the best places on the map around your cities before anyone else. So you get the more favorable routes.
Claim those routes before they get taken.
Exactly. And again, it can be one of those things that can be quite punishing because the person who's in first place can often not afford to buy the cities that they wanted because now only the expensive connections are left on the board.
The player order is determined by how many cities that you've built in.
Correct.
So there is a strategy in not building all the cities that you can. Build up your power plants, build up your resources first, and then build up your cities so that you can stay in not first place, maybe, and then benefit from that player order.
Yes.
It's a tricky balance.
Yeah, it's sort of about timing when you want to jump to the lead. You have to kind of judge when you want to break away into the lead, kind of like a cycling race.
Yeah.
It's very neat. And it's one that, when Power Grid came out, that's one that I had not seen before. At the end of every round, players decide how many cities they can provide power to in their network. You have to pay for that power with the resources that you purchased by returning those to supply. The end of the game is triggered when one or more players has purchased a specific number of cities in their network, and this is determined by the number of players in the game. The winner is the one who can provide power to the most cities at the very end.
It's always an interesting puzzle because you want to cross that threshold of the number of cities. And I think in our 4-player game, it was 17.
Yep.
So on that turn, when you know the 17th house is being built, you want to maximize your energy output in order to power as many buildings as possible, maybe even trying to get 18 or 19. You can see this last turn coming from a few turns away. You can kind of anticipate that it's coming and prepare for it. But the downside is you can be in that last turn and know you're not going to win the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The downside is you can get to that last turn and go, oh, Matt's going to end it, and there's no way I can win this.
It can make for a slightly anticlimactic ending to what is a very exciting game. I played a 2-player version of this just the other day, and I found that the interaction with the 2-player actually worked really well.
Yeah.
I didn't think the game would work that well at 2, but it does really well.
It does, yeah.
But we were definitely on that last turn. It was decided in the auction. Who was going to win was decided in the auction because the money and the routes and the houses was all planned ahead of time. It was all dependent on how many houses we'd be able to power, which power plants we would get.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting puzzle, and we just loved it. Our brains were on fire.
In a lot of ways, it's kind of like watching a basketball game. You're sort of watching this person's leading here at the beginning, now this person's leading in the middle, and it really only matters the last round or maybe the last two rounds of who's going to actually win. And sometimes that is not easily to see early or midway through the game, but it can be a little anticlimactic that way. The other thing that's brilliant about this game when I first played it, and still happens every single time I play it, is there are so many occasions where you want to buy a power plant or resources or a city, and you're $1 or maybe $2.
Yeah.
But usually just $1 short of doing all the things that you want to do on your turn, or some of the things that you want to do. And I still don't understand the math that's involved in this game.
Yeah.
I've played it, since it came out, basically. I've played it quite a bit. And I'm always fascinated and amazed that the designer, Friedman Fries, has managed to create this game with what I would consider a lot of variability. Like, how can he predict that I'm going to bid 3 over the asking price for this power plant, and, you're going to buy double the amount of resources, and that's going to equal me not being able to buy that one extra city that I want, and I'm going to miss it by exactly just $1. It's both frustrating, it's marveling, it's a phenomenon that people talk about online about Power Grid. Like, it's something that not just our gaming groups have encountered. It's encountered everywhere when you play this game. I have to think that there's something in the math that people who are smarter than me could probably explain.
Castles of Burgundy. The Castles of Burgundy is a dice-rolling resource management tile placement game for 2 to 4 players that plays in about 90 minutes. Designed by Stefan Feld and published by Alea Ravensburger in 2011. Plan, trade, and build your Burgundian estate to prosperity and prominence. Castles of Burgundy is set in medieval France, and players play aristocrats controlling small princedoms. Players compete by drafting settlement tiles from the main board and adding them to their own player board. Each player's board represents their domain. It's been divided into several regions, and each region is made up of different hexagons. Each hex fits a tile. The dark green regions, usually just 1 hex, are for castles, while the light green regions are for fields and meadows for your animals. The blue regions are for your ships that will expand trade, and the yellow regions are where you place your knowledge tiles that will give you bonuses both during the game and at the end. The brown tiles are for buildings. Each time you build a building, you get a bonus depending on which building you built. Castles of Burgundy is played over 5 phases, and each phase is divided into 5 rounds. At the start of all rounds, all players roll 2 dice. It's these dice that will allow you to draft the tiles from the main board and or place tiles into your princedoms. Each location on the main board has been assigned a die face, as has each hex in your player board. In order to acquire the tile, you have to spend the corresponding die. Then, on a subsequent turn, you have to spend another die to place it into your princedom. Placing tiles into your princedoms will trigger a secondary effect. Animals and pastures will score victory points based on the number of similar animals in that same pasture. Some of the buildings you can build will allow you to draft more tiles from the main board, or give you money or workers to spend on future turns. When you build a castle, you'll get another turn as though you're spending a die face of any value. In addition to this tile drafting tile placement mechanism, there's also a small resource management component, where players gather goods from the main board and ship them for victory points with the help of the blue ship tiles. Castles of Burgundy is a great balance of personal puzzle on your player board and player interaction. It's not completely multiplayer solitaire, but your opponents are limited in the way that they can interact with you. It's only a little bit mean.
That's true. It's not very mean. There's a little bit, but not much.
The tile drafting placement mechanism is very satisfying. If you get stuck, you can spend workers to change the value of a die. This helps mitigate that luck. But again, it's input randomness as opposed to output randomness. You roll the dice, see what you get, and then decide what to do with it. If you spend time and or resources on a previous turn to get more workers, you can adjust those die results to what you need.
Yeah.
This is why I feel Castles of Burgundy feels elegant. Because every time you place a tile on your board, you get a bonus.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're spinning your wheels or taking a step backwards when you choose the path that will help you mitigate that luck.
Yeah. Like we were talking earlier about Agricola, this, you really feel like you're accomplishing something, you're moving forward, your domain is growing.
You're building.
Yeah, you're building things as you go along, and you've got lots of options. This definitely is an elegant game. I think that fits this really, really well.
Yeah. And with each of those tiles giving you a bonus, like the brown tiles or the building tiles, each building will give you a different thing. It'll be more workers or more gold, or maybe you're drafting more tiles. So it gives it that sort of cascade, right? Like you've been doing a few things, but now because you did those things on the previous turn, this turn you get to do 3 things. Or for you know what I mean? Like it's it's building, which is really, really great.
Cascade, that's a great word for it.
The one thing about the game that feels a little noodly and takes away from the elegance is the setup.
Yes, it is a bit of a horse to set it up, isn't it?
There's tons of these little tiles. They're about the size of a quarter, and they all need to be turned face down at the start of the game so that you're drawing them blind.
Yeah.
I actually built a foam core insert that fits the box perfectly and keeps the tiles separated by type and keeps them face down.
Very nice.
It reduces the setup to mere seconds and has completely eliminated that barrier of entry when you decided to play the game or not.
That's good.
The design for this insert is freely available on the internet on both Board Game Geek and YouTube. You just simply search Castles of Burgundy foam core storage solution and you'll find what you need.
Excellent.
Yeah. What I really like is that when the box closes and the lid is on and you shake the box, all the tiles get mixed up, but they don't turn over because the space that the tiles are in is so narrow, they can't flip upside down.
Right.
So they're being shuffled, but they're not being revealed.
That's really good design. That's excellent. I'm glad that it's available. Like anyone can get this.
Yeah.
Most people have the same version of Castle of Burgundy and the same box size and everything. So it should work perfect.
Yeah.
You've shown it to me. I like that you can store it vertically or horizontally or throw it in the bottom of your game bag. Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of bucks in foam core at the dollar store and a sharp knife. And you're good to go.
Every time I sit down to play Castles of Burgundy, I feel like, oh, this is a complex game. I don't quite remember exactly how it works and what's going to happen and how this works with that. And I have to kind of go over the rules. And then 5-10 minutes in, it's like, oh, this all makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's really streamlined and brilliant, and elegant is the better word.
Yeah.
And it works well. And it's not nearly as complicated or confusing as you think going into it.
Yeah.
I think it might be a bit intimidating for new players.
It is a bit much, right? With the blue tiles, the green tiles, they make sense. But then the brown tiles, each one is something different. And then the light green tiles, the knowledge tokens, the ones that give you in-game bonuses or end-game bonuses. Yeah, there's a cheat sheet. I think it's at the back of the rule book. You flip the rule book over and it's all right there. You hand that to the new player,
right,
so that they can reference those different pictures, right? After a few games, you go, oh, I know what that means. Oh, I know what that means. No problem. But yeah, you just need that little reference to get the newbie up to speed.
Yeah, it's probably one that I should probably play more, and it would, that kind of knowledge would stick in my head, because every time I play it, it's got that little, just a tiny twinge of anxiety. It's like, oh, this game again. I don't know why. I've got a mental block about Castles of Burgundy. And not to say I don't like it. I absolutely love it. It's one of our most cherished games. That just reminded me of something. For a long time, this was on a great many people's games that need better components, or games that need a deluxeified version or something like that.
Yeah.
The game that most people that I've seen in my version of the game, it's not a very The artwork is fine. I'm not saying it's an ugly game, but
it's not very beautiful.
Yeah, and the components are a little thin, and they just don't feel. They're not chunky cardboard pieces. They're a little small. They just doesn't feel right.
Yeah,
I do know they released some sort of anniversary edition or something like that, but I've not seen it. Have you?
I have. That was the first version I played. Was the anniversary edition, the new deluxeified, or I guess there's an expansion 2 included. I preferred the original. I actually sought out the older version and found that one and put that one into my collection. I much prefer the art and design. It's the graphic design and the way that they've communicated the actions in icon form. It's a little bit confusing on the newer version. And I didn't find that the art was that much improved. It's not a pretty game, and there's room for improvement, and none of that improvement was made, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I just went with the classic version, which is just fine.
Yeah.
Such a great game. Yeah.
I remember I saw it online, and I was like, yeah, I'm happy with my old version. I don't need to upgrade it.
No.
If I'm going to upgrade it, I'm going to make my own pieces, which would be a terribly long,
arduous
process. But yeah. But maybe worth it.
Yeah.
Someday, when I retire. Modern art. Modern art is an auction game about buying and then selling art for the most money. Designed by Rainer Knizia in 1992, modern art can be played by 3 to 5 players, ages 10 and up, in about an hour. There are more than 25 different versions of modern art, and the game was published by a long list of companies, but originally published by Hans Imglick. Players are art collectors trying to buy and then sell art for the most profit. The game is played over 4 rounds. Players start with some money and a handful of cards. Each card is a different piece of art from one of the game's 5 different artists and has one of 5 different icons indicating the type of auction that is required when selling that piece of art. Players choose a card from their hand to auction by placing it face up in front of them. Like most auction games, players have to bid more than their opponent, can't bid more than they actually have, and the winner pays the current player for that art, or pay to the bank if the current player wins the bid for their own artwork card. This isn't just an auction game. It's actually 5 auction games in one. There are 5 different kinds of auctions that happen during the game. The different auctions are a free auction where all players can bid and there is no order to bidding. The once-around auction where each player gets one chance only in player order to bid on the art or pass. If you pass, you lose the opportunity to bid on the card. A closed auction where each player decides how much to bid and puts their money in a closed fist, and then everyone reveals the amount at the same time. A fixed-priced auction is where the start player sets the price for the card, and each player in turn order is offered to buy the card for that amount or pass. If everyone passes, the start player must buy the card and pay that amount to the bank. The final auction is a double auction where 2 cards by the same artist are auctioned off at the same time. When the 5th card for an artist is played, the round ends and a market board is adjusted based on the number of paintings that each artist sold. In future rounds, paintings by the top 3 artists who sold the most will have their paintings be worth more. First place adding 30, second place adding 20, and third place adding 10 extra dollars. And the more times that artist's artwork is sold in the top 3 of each round, the more value their art will have near the end of the game. The player with the most money at the end of 4 rounds is the winner. Pablo Picasso said, "The purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off our souls." I really love modern art. I can't believe you and I haven't played it yet together. We need to do that.
I have yet to play Modern. It's the only game on this episode I haven't played.
Well, we'll have to change that because it's a gem. Yeah. It's a true gem. As a kid, I had a lot of board games in my collection. I imagine that you did too. I was the kid in the neighborhood that, people would come over and we'd literally play board games on the porch. Like I'd be, bring out 3 board games and we'd just play there for an afternoon on the porch. I had a lot. And there are, like everyone, there are a few of those board games that really stand out in my memory. One of those games was a game from 1970 called Masterpiece. It's a game about buying and selling and then auctioning pieces of fine art. And the cards are actually pieces of real art. Not really, the most fascinating game that 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old Chris Cormier could have chosen, but one that I particularly loved. Those memories of playing Masterpiece, I think, is what made me fall in love with Reiner Knizia's Modern Art. Modern Art is by far the better game and has way more interesting choices. But I don't think I would have enjoyed it nearly as much without playing Masterpiece so much in my childhood. What was your childhood favorite game, Matt?
Clue.
Clue.
Yeah.
That's so you. Yeah. That's perfect. That's the Mr. Deduction game right there.
The other one was Admirals, which was a nautical version of Stratego.
Oh, okay. Cool. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was probably, a notch or two nerdier because I'd be like, hey, do you want to play this cool game about, selling pieces of art like Van Gogh and Klimt? Let's play this. It was a hard sell. Thankfully, my parents played with me. After 30 years, Modern Art is still considered by many to be the definitive auction game. This is a very, very clever auction game, but it's super, super easy to learn. It's a great game to pull out and teach to someone new. It's a concept that everyone understands. It's got really simple rules. There are 5 kinds of auctions, and that's all you have to basically know on your turn. On your turn, all you're doing is picking a card and doing whatever the icon tells you to do. It offers a lot of interesting strategic choices, and the dynamics of understanding your opponents makes the game so much different each time you play it. Because with auction games, you can have someone who's willy-nilly, I bet 20, when clearly the piece is worth 5 or something like that. And then you have the player who likes to bully the thing or the player who likes to bluff it. It just changes so much. Mm-hmm. It really depends on who you're playing with. There is a lot of mental arithmetic, some gymnastics that you're doing mentally in the game.
Okay.
You're trying to decide whether you want to sell certain cards and how much to bid for others. There's a lot of sort of, let me think about that. Is that worth $20,000 or is it worth $22,000? Do I want to bid that? Do I want to risk that this artist will be in the top 3? And if they are, then this piece could be worth $50,000 and I will have gotten a good deal. But if they're not in the top 3, it could be worth nothing or almost nothing, depending on where they turn up. When we play where players are strongly encouraged to describe the art on the card that they are auctioning before they begin.
Nice.
This might sound like, this is an incredibly interesting piece called The Physical Impossibility of Fish Living on Land. In it, the artist is expressing the angst of the modern penguin and his struggles against technological advances of the industrial age. That kind of thing just makes the game come to life. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The artwork in most versions, there are a lot of versions in this game.
Yeah.
And the artwork in many of the earlier versions was quite bad. They used fake artists and it was really abstract kind of splashes of color.
Tried to make it look like a Jackson Pollock or something.
Yeah, not even.
And failed.
Yeah, a really kind of create the art in PowerPoint sort of version of Jackson Pollock maybe.
Ouch. I've often wondered if the game contained real art from real artists.
Back in the day when I first learned the game, I only had this really ugly version. And a lot of people on Board Game Geek and online were sharing the versions that they made of their own cards using real art from real artists. And because I had loved Masterpiece playing with real cards with real art on them back in my day, I had to give this a stab. And I actually did it. I created my own rethemed version.
Nice.
But I didn't want to do the sort of fine art that, that a lot of people did.
No.
What I ended up doing was modern comic book art. And I created this version using some of the comic book artists that I was most interested at the time. Bill Sienkiewicz, John Byrne, Jim Lee, Frank Miller, and Brian Boland as the artists. I created the cards, the paper money. I created screens, board in the end.
Nice.
I did the whole game up again with this comic book theme.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, this was just for my own personal use. It's not available for anyone. But if you're interested and want to see photos, you can see this on my social media. And it's actually on BoardGameGeek.com as well.
I love auction games and I love comic books. And I'm surprised that we have not played this version yet. I think I've asked you to play this version a few times. It just hasn't got to the table yet.
Yeah.
There's just so many other great games to play.
There is so many new games. There's so many games of all kinds that, ones that we've missed from previous times.
Yeah.
And new ones always coming out. It's hard to keep up.
Yeah, it's hard. It really is. The last time we got together, you introduced me to Power Grid.
Right.
And that is now in my collection and the family play it all the time. And it's great. It's so good that these classic games that have stood the test of time, but then are now new to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like experiencing the game all over again when I teach it, to someone who hasn't played it. It's like, oh, we haven't played this one in a couple years. And I remember now how much I loved it and how many times we played it and why I loved it and what little elements that I liked along the way. So yeah, that's fun. We will have to fix that and add modern art to our must play list.
Exactly. Have you played any of the games that we've talked about today? What's your favorite modern classic? Drop us a line at escapeintoboardgames@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to the Escape Into Board Games podcast. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Escape Into Board Games.
This episode is produced by Matt McKenzie and Chris Cormier. Production assistance by Sherry Cormier. Music by John Yassoot and Daniel Carlton. See you at the next Escape.